Lesson 9. Closing in capture and engulfing Atari. In our last lesson, we learned two capturing methods, double Atari and downward Atari. For double Atari, we look for two of the opponent's stones or groups that only have two liberties. Then we play at the cutting point to Atari both of them at the exact same time. Downward Atari, on the other hand, utilizes the edge of the board. We drive the opponent's stones toward the edge, or toward the first line, making it very difficult for them to escape. Today, we'll learn closing in capture and engulfing Atari, which use our existing advantageous stones to capture the opponent. Let's first look at the basic shape of a closing in capture. All right, please pay attention. In this shape, how should black capture the white stone? We can see this white stone only has two liberties. So, where should black play the Atari to capture the white stone cleanly? Please notice this existing black stone. Alright, with that hint, black should play the Atari right here. This fully utilizes the power of that existing black stone. Because if white tries to escape right now, thanks to the presence of this black stone, black can now easily capture the white stones. Notice why it is called a closing in capture. These two stones act like a door, forming a sort of enclosing net. When white tries to escape, I simply close the door and capture them. So, this shape is a standard, typical closing in capture. Why do we need to learn this closing in capture technique? In this shape, if black plays Atari from here, it forms a shape called a ladder. If white happens to have a ladder breaker on the outside, white can actually escape. We will learn more about this ladder technique in later lessons. But we know that a ladder doesn't guarantee capturing white, or even if it can capture white right now. Future changes on the outside might eventually allow white to escape. So, it is obviously not as good as directly capturing them here with a closing in capture. Those with some WeiQi basics might know that black has many ways to capture white locally. For example, a solid extension or a knight's move, or even a jump. However, if we add a white stone right here, we know that black can only capture by playing at this position. Therefore, this position is the most fundamental closing in capture. Now, let's look at some more typical closing in capture shapes. Let's change white's group to 3 stones now. Alright? In this shape, where should black play to capture white? The answer is to play at this position. We need to remember that door-like shape, using this black stone to form a door-like structure. So, when white tries to escape, we can simply close the door and capture them. If black plays Atari at this position, it forms a ladder again, and white can escape if the ladder is favorable. So, this Atari direction is completely wrong. Let's look at another shape. Alright, with a black stone placed here, where should black play to capture white? Please remember to utilize this stone. We need to keep this concept in mind. Whenever black has an extra stone on the side, we must know how to make use of it. So black's correct direction is to Atari here. This way, if white tries to run, this existing stone perfectly provides assistance and we can directly capture them. If you fail to use this stone and play Atari from this position, white now escapes with 3 liberties, and black has no way to continue chasing white. So, the key point of a closing-in capture is to always utilize that extra stone on the side to form a door-like shape that completely encloses it. Now, let's look at the engulfing Atari. The basic shape of an engulfing Atari is like this. The similarity between engulfing Atari and closing in capture is that we still need to utilize the existing stone. That is this stone right here. Black's correct Atari direction is to play here. When white tries to escape, our existing stone comes into play once again. And now we can capture the white stones. However, if black plays Atari in the wrong direction without utilizing this stone, after white extends, they get 3 liberties, and it becomes hard for black to capture white. The shape we just set up is the fundamental shape of an engulfing Atari. We can also continue adding stones to white's group. For example, in a shape like this, we similarly need to utilize this existing stone and play the Atari right here. Why is it called an engulfing Atari? It is actually a bit like a person opening their arms and giving you a tight hug. And this part here represents the person's body, while this acts like the opened arm wrapping around you, so you won't be able to escape from their arms or slip away. The stones work the exact same way. When I use this hugging-like formation to block you from the front, these 2 stones simply cannot escape. For example, in this shape, with 2 stones, white is completely unable to escape. We can also look at another shape, adding a few more stones. Alright, if white has a stone here, pay attention to black's Atari direction. Because there is a stone right in front, we play Atari from here, driving it towards my existing stone. Now, if white extends, I continue to Atari. If white extends again, I still play Atari. And it ultimately remains an engulfing Atari shape. Now that we've learned these 2 basic capturing methods, how should we apply them in actual games? Because the capturing techniques we've discussed so far all seem to require black to have an absolute stone advantage to capture white. But in a real game, whenever these shapes happen to appear, we just need to seize the opponent's flaws to capture their stones. For example, We have now added some stones for white. So on the board, it looks like a 5-on-5 situation. If we can keenly spot the defect in white's shape and play the capturing shape we just learned, we will be able to capture the opponent's stones. This shape is exactly the closing in capture we just learned. In actual games, shapes like this one often appear alongside the opponent's cutting points. So, when we execute a closing in capture, an engulfing Atari, or even a double Atari or downward Atari from the last lesson, they will often be associated with a cut and Atari shape. A cut and Atari is easy to understand, since we've already learned about cutting points. It simply means playing at a cutting point and capturing the opponent simultaneously. So in this shape, we find the opponent's cutting point and Atari here. And this shape is a standard closing in capture, allowing us to capture these two white stones. We can continue to look at other shapes. For example, if white has a 3-stone shape, we can similarly set up a shape like this for white, where both sides seem to have a similar number of stones. At this point, if we can spot the weakness in the opponent's shape, we can similarly use a closing in capture to capture the opponent's 3 stones. This is a common cut. By combining the closing in capture with a cut and Atari, we can achieve a highly effective capturing result. Similarly, an engulfing Atari can also involve cutting points. For example, in this shape, white has a stone right here. So black now plays a cut and Atari at this position, which also acts as an engulfing Atari, capturing the white stones. We can also add 2 more stones to white's group. Alright, in this shape, if black happens to have a stone right here, black playing a cut and Atari at this position also forms an engulfing Atari. So, as long as we firmly remember this capturing shape, we will find it much easier to capture the opponent's stones. Of course, our understanding of certain shapes here can be expanded just a little bit more. For closing in capture and engulfing Atari, the core principle is to utilize your existing stones, driving the opponent's stones directly towards them. If we can master this key principle, you'll find that many shapes can be used to capture the opponent. For example, black has a stone here. When I have a black stone right here, I play Atari at this position. White runs out, and black continues to Atari. This is also an engulfing Atari shape. For example, black has a stone here. When black plays Atari right here, white runs. I continue to Atari, and white can only run again when I play Atari once more. Notice that the shape is now a closing in capture, and white is captured once again. Alright, So, after mastering the basic shapes of closing, in capture, and engulfing Atari, we understand that driving the opponent's stones towards our own existing stones makes it much easier to capture them. Using these two basic shapes to capture the opponent's stones is one of the fundamental capturing methods that we absolutely must master. Alright, that concludes our lesson for today.